Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim will begin. Alhamdulillah nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa nashhadu anna sayyidana maulana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu sallallahu ta'ala alihi wa ashabihi wa sallam tasliman kathiran kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our introductory session on the Ahadith of medicine. And before I get into the details, I just want to emphasize some really important points about this particular program, which is very unique and is quite unprecedented in terms of courses like this. And what I want to express initially is why we have actually chosen this course in the first place. Now, from a personal perspective, you know, I see patients on a general day-to-day level, and living in a place and working in a place where there are a large majority Muslims. We have interesting presentations of some of these patients in terms of some of the alternative type of medical therapy that they may be receiving, as opposed to the conventional medicine as is practiced in the West. And it's interesting, at first, you know, I had very little knowledge of some of the things that they would be talking about. So gradually sort of developing this idea and understanding about some of these topics allowed people like myself to then gain a much stronger hold on understanding truly what that form of therapy is. And there's always sometimes claims about this being prophetic medicine or having some kind of traditional sort of context in terms of a whole transmission from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or even in terms of its authenticity and its blessing and so forth. So it seems like a topic which needs to really be heavily explored. And as a result of that, this course will enable us to basically delve into the details of such elements of our day-to-day practice and how these sort of concepts relate to our day-to-day practice, as well as understanding those people who undergo such forms of therapy. Now, so why is this course important for any Muslim doctor or health professional? It's important because it's very important that we have a good understanding as Muslims and health professionals around health, illness, and how our faith generally articulates some kind of message related to how health should be practiced, how we should relate to medicine, and also to give some kind of indication to how health was practiced and how medicine and treatment of illness was an important part of day-to-day practice at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there were many Sahaba radiallahu anhum who underwent certain therapies. And how does that measure up in terms of being something that has been ascribed by Islam, whether it's been something that has been a tradition from other cultures that has been embodied within the tradition in itself, and that's been transmitted to us as we practice medicine today from an alternative therapy perspective. Now, why should Muslim doctors attend such a course? For a number of very important reasons. One, that you will become better informed and gain the knowledge and the attitude that Islam promotes around health prevention and treatment. Second, that it'll give you an understanding of the science of how medicine was practiced traditionally, historically, at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how that has evolved over time and has presented itself today in the modern day context, and how it relates to some of the conventional ways that we treat people. What are the similarities? What are the differences? Are there any apparent contradictions? Are there any things, anything in current understanding of science, and how that relates to some of those prophetic traditions, and if truly they are prophetic traditions that have transmitted this particular form of alternative practice. The third is mainly more for spiritual reasons, and that is to gain the blessings of the chain of transmission of Ahadith from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to this very day, and all the narrators within that chain, which I'll explain in more detail in a short while. Now, clearly there's been a growing interest in alternative therapy, just generally throughout history, other than the sort of conventional medicine that was always practiced. And you'll find that becoming more so a thing with Muslim communities today, where a lot of people are generally tending to refer back to the Hadith and the prophetic tradition, and historically how things have generally developed over time. Now, so this gives us the opportunity to really start throwing a sharp lens on the whole issue and looking at the authenticity of some of these practices, also looking at the value and what they truly represent, understanding the historical context to them and relating it to modern day context. If there is any apparent conflict, how to relate and reconcile such conflicts. Are there other sort of approaches to this? Realizing how much of it truly is a recognition. Was the Prophet ﷺ a physician? And was his objective to treat people through these conventional ways? Or was this an essence of him ﷺ basically approving of certain medical practices at his time? Also, it gives us the opportunity as medical professionals to relate this type of practice and tradition to our day-to-day practice in the things that we do. And essentially, all Muslim practitioners should have some kind of understanding to some of these questions. And also, they should be able to advise or give some kind of expert advice to those people who approach them regarding some of these concepts. So, what is the course about? Just to describe it in a few words, it's in essence to give you some kind of understanding of the Islamic legal and ethical perspectives to some of the issues mentioned in Hadith literature or related to medicine and therapy, and also preventative measures. It also gives us a sense of basic principles of the science of Hadith. So you will learn some elements of the mustalahat, the terminologies used in Hadith. You'll also learn the basis for the practice of medicine according to the Sharia, some of the more pertinent points related to some of the conventional ways that some of these prophetic traditions or historical traditional ways of treating have presented themselves into day-to-day practice today. Also to provide a forum of interpersonal contact between medical doctors, physicians, and the ulama, so that we can work together in defining the right course of how we should perceive such non-conventional practices. So we will begin with the book of medicine, the Sahih Al Bukhari, Kitab Al Tibb, of the Jami' Sahih of Imam Bukhari. And the reason why this kitab has been chosen, I will explain, as being one of the most obvious reasons that stand out are the comprehensiveness of Kitab Al Tibb of Imam Bukhari, also to relate the authenticity of the hadith that exist in this kitab. So the chosen text is the chapter of medicine from Sahih Bukhari, and these prophetic traditions were collected by great Muslim hadith scholars generally over time. Imam Bukhari, he recorded these hadith in one particular collection of his kitab, and these hadith have been transmitted since then with a sense of authenticity. Also acknowledging the fact that the kitab of Imam Bukhari, Jami' al-Sahih, is the most authentic kitab as recognized by majority of the muhaddithun after the Holy Quran. Now, there are certain things that we need to really grasp around the science of hadith tradition and sanad and what that actually means. So clearly the Quran stipulates قُلْ أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ, that follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and follow his Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this has been expressed in Surah Nur, and then it also manifestly explains the character of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the fact that we should take him as an example in a number of different ways. So in terms of even his practices and his approach to medical therapy and prevention play a very important role in this. So the verse of the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, which emphasize the point that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has a perfect character, and we should embody that. Now, throughout the history of Hadith, the prophetic tradition, there are, in essence, Hadith are usually looked at in three particular ways. There are those elements of the Hadith which are taken as the qawl, the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fa'al, the actions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the taqreer. The taqreer are the tacit approval of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, in other words, a Sahaba radiallahu anhu would basically say that I was there, we did this in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not prohibit us from doing such an act, and this is considered as a tacit approval. Then, as Hadith grew over time and was recorded at a later stage, generally, what started happening is people began to realize and appreciate the value of these prophetic traditions after the demise of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and obviously made reference to the Quran and the prophetic tradition as understood by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as these things generally grew over time, then you had certain components within this whole growth of prophetic tradition where certain people and certain individuals began to manipulate the process and introduce their own understanding of certain concepts into the Hadith literature. And as a result of this, there creeped a number of fabricated Hadith within the Hadith sort of historical tradition. And as a result of this, something very powerful happened where scholars of Hadith began painstakingly going through all these Hadith and looking at the authenticity in extensive detail, looking specifically at the narrators of these Hadith as a direct chain from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or from the Sahabi or the Tabi'i, the generation after the Sahaba, all the way to us, or all the way to some of these authentic kitabs, such as the Jami' Sahih of Imam Bukhari. And in essence, a whole science grew from this, such as the science of Jarh wa Ta'dil, which is to basically critique the narrators, their character, and a number of very important aspects of measuring Hadith began evolving as a result of this. And these particular measures were mainly in relation to the continuity of the chain. So if there were any narrators who were not recognized within this chain, who could not be critiqued, or their general lifestyle and their biography not looked at in detail, then and as a result being given the level of authenticity, then on that basis such Hadith would be such that they would not be accepted. So the conditions were quite stringent, and there were a number of sort of things that Muhaddithun would look at. One of the things was in relation to the adala, so it was the uprightness of the narrators in themselves. Then there were things like their hifz, so their ability to retain their memory in being able to retain the Hadith. Then there were aspects in relation to the chain itself. So the isnad. The isnad is in essence the chain from narrator to narrator. And the amazing aspect of this particular tradition is the unique feature is that every member of that chain, every narrator of that chain, from generation to generation, is measured in such a way, and Hadith are transmitted from one particular narrator to the other narrator through a number of different routes, generally through reading the Hadith and hearing the Hadith, and it being transmitted from, as they say, sadr ala sadr, from chest to chest, from one narrator all the way up to the recordings of these kitabs. And in essence, from these particular kitabs, these authentic Hadith books, all the way to us through ulama, through the chain, from one narration to the other, and so forth. So this concept of the continuity of the chain was a very essential component to Muslims in their prophetic tradition, which you'll find is very unique to Islam, that no other faith or no other historical event has ever occurred which could embody the level of detail and the level of stringency in measuring historical information being passed and transmitted in such a fashion with such scrutiny. And for this reason, there was a serious element of recognition of certain conditions. Certain individuals who were experts in this area were also scrutinized in some of the conditions that they were using to measure the strength of hadith. And there were elements even in terms of basic and very like, for example, issues of illah, which is illatul qadiha. Those are in essence small issues which are not as apparent in a hadith, that later on when you relate it to the Quran and you relate it to historical context, you relate it to whether these two narrators have ever met historically, these kind of issues arose and started developing, producing sciences within themselves on scrutiny of narrators, sciences related to different narrators, where the science of Asma'i Rijal, and so forth. So you can see as time developed, a number of different sciences evolved over time. Not only did sciences evolve, but also you had muhaddithun, experts in hadith, who started formulating certain terminologies to define common concepts in relating some of these phenomenal points in hadith literature. And these became more systematic at the time of Ibn Salah, which is recorded in his Muqaddamah, and also later on by Ibn Hajar Asqalani rahimahullah, who produced his Nukhbat al-Fiqh, Nuzhat al-Nazar, a commentary on the Kitab. So there's quite a lot to pick up in terms of the tradition and how this amazing science developed, which is very unique to Muslims. And the beauty of those who will attend this course is that they will be able to experience this journey, grasp the understanding of some of the terminologies that are used in hadith, related directly solely to this Kitab Al Tibb, the book of medicine of Imam Bukhari in his Jami' al-Sahih, his most authentic kitab after the Holy Quran. Just to give you a bit of an idea about the Jami' al-Sahih al-Bukhari, that this kitab is a recognized collection of hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was compiled by Muhammad ibn Isma al-Bukhari, who was generally around during 194 Hijri to 256 Hijri, sort of an early sort of classical period. And the hadiths in the book itself are arranged into 97 books with 3,450 chapters. So you can see the extensive collection that Imam Bukhari painstakingly went through to achieve such a recording. They were also classified according to subject matter, so mainly in terms of fiqh. In addition, other subjects such as theology, ethics, and as we will be studying, medicine became a separate book in itself. The Sahih Bukhari is recognized by the overwhelming majority of Muslim scholars as the most authentic collection after the Holy Quran, after the most authentic collection of hadith and prophetic tradition. And also, Imam Bukhari spent approximately 16 years compiling these hadith in such a way. And he ended up with approximately 2,602 hadiths, where approximately 9,000 altogether. What he does is he repeats the same hadith in a number of the chapters of the book to put his point forward in relation to the Tarjumat al-Bab, which is the titling of the chapter and the point that he's trying to raise from those collective hadith in each particular chapter. So there are many different kind of commentaries you'll find on this kitab. As part of this course, we will relate to some of those commentaries, and I'm just going to give you some examples, like for example, Fathul Bari of Ibn Hajar Asqalani rahimahullah, and also kitabs like Umdatul Qari of Sheikh Aini, and various other commentaries that we will be using to give you more detail about some of these hadith that relate to medicine as a whole. Now, There are a number of different views on the science of the medicine of the Prophet or Tibb al-Nabawi, and as a result, you'll find that different individuals and different scholars held quite different views. But generally speaking, the Kitab Al Tibb of Imam Bukhari is explains and the way Imam Bukhari has presented his kitab is a quite vast view of the science of medicine. So it's not solely related to what is considered as the medicine as practiced by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but you'll find that Imam Bukhari, he goes quite holistically into a quite vast element of just describing the whole science of prevention and treatment from a more general perspective, which is quite comprehensive, as you will note from some of the contents and some of the sessions that we will be delivering with their topic titles. You'll also recognize that that the medicine of the Prophet, as it's mentioned sometimes, is quite broad, and it doesn't just refer to what has been said and practiced by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also includes every field of human medical research and activity that has occurred during that time. And as time has gone on, there have been many elements of that medical therapy and treatment that has been taken from other cultures, which during the time of the Prophet ﷺ was approved by him and also was regularly practiced after and developed further until today. So you will also see that to do so, there are certain cases and there are certain hadith that we should always consult with and get a truly authentic view on those hadith. So this will give us the opportunity to learn from certain Muslim scholars to actually get that level of detail. Now, I've already explained the blessing and the serious attributes about the chain of transmission. Now, this was taken as a serious science during the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and for 2 to 3 generations after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as it did continue to even until the times where such of these great collections of hadith transpired. However, at that particular time, the chain of transmission was considered a very serious aspect of the science. And as that was further developed, from the time that these books have recorded these hadith to our time, there have been many scholars who have transmitted the same hadith using the same traditional style of verbatim transmission and audibly transmitting the hadith to their students and from their students to their students and repeatedly from one chain and generation to the other, all the way down to some of the instructors that you will have who will be delivering these sessions. So I'm just going to briefly outline some of the particular specialities about the instructors that we will have who will be delivering these particular sessions. So that will allow us to spiritually connect with these hadith all the way, not only to the author of these kitabs or the compiler of these hadith book, Imam Bukhari, but also from Imam Bukhari all the way to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what we call this is the sanad, and within the sanad there are a certain what we call the silsila. And the silsila is usually a term that is used to define the chain of narration that comes from the kitab itself all the way down to individuals like me who will be reading these hadith to you, and also some of your other instructors. So the more particular aspects of our particular silsila and majority of the instructors, I'll just explain that in a bit of detail. So there is something about gaining the highest asanid, so the a'la sanad, and what that relates to is having the least number of narrators in the chain. And clearly, the less the number of narrators in the chain, the closeness there is to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as a result of that, there is an element of tabarruk and blessing in having something like this, because it ensures a sense of authenticity, considering that the narrators are all reliable. It also ensures a sense of continuity as well. So the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, the generation after the Sahaba, they consider this as a very important part of their spiritual connection to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as did the hadith scholars after. And this particular tradition has continued from that time right down to today. And the instructors that we will have who will be delivering this, they generally fall within two main silsila of sanad that you guys will achieve at the end of your course. And what that really means is that you will be given what we call ijaza. And ijaza, in essence, means that you will be given the permission to go forth and transmit these hadith to other people, your family members, to friends, to people you know, with the correct understanding and meaning as has been transmitted by your instructors. And this will be given in terms of a formal certificate in a formal way. So we have two particular silsila. We have what we call the silsila qasimiyya, and the silsila qasimiyya is basically a silsila that extends all the way to Imam Bukhari. But before we go into the detail of that, this is mainly a silsila which is prevalent in the Indian Pak subcontinent. For at that time, the Sheikh Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, who was around during 1014 to 1176 Hijri, and he, in essence, introduced these authentic kitabs of hadith to the Indian Pak subcontinent. So you'll find that the majority of the silsila that of sanad that you see in the Indian Pak subcontinent scholars has in essence come from Shah Waliullah Dehlawi. And as a result of this, what you'll find that the majority of the instructors, because they are from the Indian Pak subcontinent and they've been trained by scholars of the Indian subcontinent, that the sanad will extend from them all the way from their teachers to teachers, all the way up to Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, and there is a clear recognized chain from Shah Waliullah Dehlawi all the way to Imam Bukhari, and from Imam Bukhari has been transmitted by those particular hadith that you guys will be studying, and you will see the names of the narrators all the way to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What a blessing it is for us to be able to sit in our own homes online and yet achieve such a great feat in being able to receive such hadith with transmission all the way to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just like historically, people would travel much a distance with ill health just to achieve such hadith. So the other silsila is the silsila mazhariya, which is the silsila of most of our instructors, and this isnad is of the students that have graduated from Mazahir al-Ulum of Saharanpur, and they are given the title Mazahir for that particular reason. But generally speaking, this silsila goes to our more late great scholar of hadith, Sheikh Muhammad Yunus al-Jaunpuri, rahmatullah alayhi, who just recently passed away. And it goes from him to Muhammad Zakaria Khandalwi, all the way to Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, and from there to Imam Bukhari, and from there to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the silsila that you will receive as a result of your participation in the course in this respect. Now, just to briefly outline Imam Bukhari's take on this kitab and how he's distributed these hadith throughout the kitab, as well as specific hadith on certain subjects in Kitab Al Tibb. Imam Bukhari, he sort of quite unanimously agreed that he was mainly concerned with a number of areas of medicine, and one was in essence to do with preventative medicine, which is called a Tibb al-Wiqaya or Tibb al-Waqa'i. So on that basis, this is considered as preventative medicine, which plays a very, very important role in Islam and medicine. And as a result of this, Imam Bukhari doesn't necessarily place majority of the hadith related to this topic within Kitab Al Tibb, but rather he disperses them throughout, either explicitly or implicitly, through other chapters of his Jami' al-Sahih, his kitab on hadith. So, for example, you'll find certain hadith related to cleanliness, tahara, hadith related to using the siwak, the toothstick, also related to ghusl and exercise and various other things throughout the whole kitab, interspersed within different chapters. However, then there is a specific kitab that comes solely on some of the more specific and particular areas related to medicine, which he places in his Kitab Al Tibb, which relates to Tibb al-Ilaj, to do with therapeutic medicine, and also the preventative component to it as well. So as a result of this, you'll find that there are a number of different topics that you'll come across. So in other words, just to summarize, so what does this course generally entail? So the course aims to provide both theory and case-based practical advice on some of the most interesting and common medical issues for Muslims from the most authentic book after the Holy Quran. So it will address some of the more fundamental questions affecting healthcare and allied professionals. Then also there are certain concepts you need to understand regarding the course content and format. So we will have a number of scholars who will be delivering this course, who have an authentic chain of narration and ijaza from their teachers all the way to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The lectures will be approximately 1 hour to 2 hours. They will be on every Sunday, and also they will be pre-recorded live sessions as well, and you will receive certificates of Sanad al-Hadith, which I talked about earlier on. There will be also online learning material available for you to read and to enhance that knowledge further. Now, just to relate to some of those topics, some of the chapters that are clearly visible on the website, but I'll just emphasize one or two of them, or a number of them, what they all relate to. So there will be something about the Islamic perspective on disease and cure. So there'll be some 1 or 2 sessions related to this, and we will talk about the therapy with natural products, such as treating with honey, treating with the milk of camels, even urine of camels, which was one particular hadith which relates to that. Also alternative therapies, such as to use sniff, and also using salt, cupping, and various other sort of traditional, conventional, non-conventional forms of treatment. Then also alternative therapies will also include many other additional things that sometimes we've not even heard of, that are clearly recorded in these hadith. Then there will be some sessions that will be discussing disease conditions and prophetic traditions relating to certain illnesses, so such as leprosy, also throat or tonsil diseases, al-udra as it's called, also epidemic diseases such as plagues, and how Muslims should react to plagues and epidemic illnesses. Also some detailed account of Islam and Ruqya. What does Ruqya mean? What does it emphasize? What are the most authentic concepts within Ruqya? How that has changed over time. There will be also some kind of discussion around the issues of omens and black magic, sihr, and also the concept of possession. We'll mention some interesting medical concepts in hadith, so the use of ajwa dates and how they relate to health and so forth. And these will all be selectively and systematically put into certain lessons in a structured way, so as for ease of learning, and also so that you get a more comprehensive understanding of the whole subject area in itself. And then finally, we'll have something about the importance of hadith and some take-home messages. So already you can see comprehensively there are a number of different areas that we'll be covering, and you will hopefully appreciate the value of such a course, especially those of you who complete the whole course and achieve a sanad in hadith related to those prophetic traditions in the Kitab Al Tibb of Imam Bukhari. If there are any questions that anybody would like to ask related to the course, I can see there's a few of you. Please fire away. Any particular questions that you have in relation to the course, in relation to the hadith, also Imam Bukhari's kitab, or the science of hadith, anything that you guys would want us to deliver in addition to what I've mentioned, please go ahead and make your comment. Okay, we've got one particular comment that's coming through. Okay, no obvious comment. Okay, so hopefully what I've said is quite comprehensive anyway. I've noticed that we've gone to about an hour. So if there's any other further questions that any of you have that you wish to relate, then please go ahead. So as you can already see, the things that we've discussed are, in essence, number one, the importance as medical professionals of going on a course like this, because it will relate to us in terms of some of the medical practices that are happening out there. One question is this course for general people, non-medical? Yes, of course it is. You know, anybody can join a course like this. We will not be using intensive medical language. It's not solely aimed at medical professionals, but rather, you know, anyone can join the course, and it will be brought to you a level that is easily understandable. So also to be acquainted with the terminologies that are used in Hadith, as well as the sort of spiritual connection with Hadith, and to be instructed. In fact, it'll give you a real good feel of what it's like to be a student of ilm, a talib al-ilm, who studies at the at the foot of great scholars. So it's a fantastic opportunity to be able to connect with ulama. It's a fantastic opportunity to gain a good grasp of the basics of hadith, and it's a fantastic opportunity to understand how the hadith related to medicine would relate to today, and to understand and grasp the true understanding and the meaning of such hadith and how we should relate to them. Okay, I can see that we're exhausted with questions. Hopefully, inshallah, they've already been addressed. So we'll finish on that note. Jazakumullah khair for attending. I think I have one more question. That's a very good question. Why have we selected Imam Bukhari's book and not any other hadith kitab from Sahih al-Sittah? You may have answered this if no problem. Yeah, the reason why we've chosen Imam Bukhari's kitab are manifold, really. Number one, it's like I said and I explained earlier on, the most authentic kitab after the Holy Quran, as it's accepted by the majority of the hadith scholars historically. Imam Bukhari's conditions for accepting hadith were very stringent and very well accepted. In fact, they are used as a template to measure other hadith from some of the other kitabs. So that's one of the main reasons why Imam Bukhari's kitab has been chosen. The other thing is Imam Bukhari's kitab, Kitab Al Tibb specifically, is very comprehensive. It covers quite a vast and broad subject areas, as I mentioned earlier on, in terms of the contents and the actual titles of some of those lectures that will be delivered. So you can see the comprehensive element to this. So we'll be talking about the whole subject of medicine, and not specifically around just simple things like cupping or using dates and honey as a form of therapy. So hopefully, a lot of that will be answered. And also, if there's any kitab that we would all like to gain a connection with, surely, if it's related to hadith, then we'd all want to be connected with the Jami' Sahih of Imam Bukhari, and I'm sure many of our attendees would agree with me on that. And also recognizing that all our instructors have been given ijaza, and as they deliver this, it'll be quite a spiritual thing for us as instructors to deliver this, because it's our connection with our teachers who have connected with their teachers, all the way to Imam Bukhari, all the way from Shah Wali Allah Rahimullah, all the way to Imam Bukhari, and then to the Prophet of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it's quite a blessed journey to go through to join such a course. So hopefully that question has been addressed. Okay, Jazakumullah khair. So I'll leave it at that note. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.